Now, before I start the discussion, here are one very important point. In the last week's discussion, there are two factual errors. Please make a correction. It's completely my mistake. One is with respect to Agriculture Infrastructure Fund. I stated that the value of the fund is worth 10 lakh crore rupees. It is actually 1 lakh crore rupees. Okay. And the second one was with respect to the cooperative ministry. I stated by mistake that cooperation is a part of the concurrent list. No, it is a part of the state list. So, these are the two corrections. It was my mistake. Please make a correction. Now, let us start today's list of the articles. The first one is with respect to LIBOR. Now, before I discuss what is given in this particular article, let us try and understand certain basics here. Whenever one bank will issue a loan, let us say to another bank or a customer or a corporate entity like this, it will charge a certain rate of interest. Is it okay? It will charge certain rate of interest. Now, there is a process as to how you arrive at this particular rate of interest. In the same way, in the international market, there are certain financial transactions which are taking place, and while deciding the lending rate, they use something called as a LIBOR. LIBOR is an acronym which basically stands for London Interbank Offered Rate. In a nutshell, if I want to define what is a LIBOR, please understand this. LIBOR stands for the rate of interest in which one bank giving an unsecured loan to another bank will charge this particular rate of interest. Is it okay? When one bank will give loan to another bank and it is an unsecured loan, there is no collateral involved here, the rate of interest charged is the basic idea of a LIBOR. Initially, it was introduced in order to provide a rate of interest, in order to impose a rate of interest on the loans which are given outside the country to a particular borrower. That is basically mid 1980s, this particular concept of a LIBOR was introduced. But over a period of time, this particular concept of a LIBOR has become one of the international benchmarks. As such, even today, there are more than 350 trillion worth of financial transactions which are basically using LIBOR itself. Now, in connection with India, there is a derivative market. There are many financial contracts which are entered into, and when an Indian businessman takes a loan outside India, which is basically a foreign currency loan, usually LIBOR is used as a benchmark to charge these kinds of transactions. So, in a nutshell, remember this, LIBOR is much more than rate of interest. It has been used as a benchmark to basically calculate various rate of interest or to impose mortgages, to provide student loans, so on and so forth. Now, over a period of time, what has happened is, I have already mentioned that more than $350 trillion worth of financial transactions are basically using LIBOR. But during the financial crisis post 2008, there was a scam which broke out relating to LIBOR. Generally, the idea of a calculation of LIBOR is done like this. There are different lenders who will have to report the rate of interest at which they are going to give loans to other banks. And based on what estimates have been provided, they used to calculate this particular rate of interest, which is called as a LIBOR. You do not have to mug up the process of calculation of LIBOR, that is not important. But what was a scam? Scam was basically, imagine all of us are the people who are reporting the rate of interest to one authority, British Bankers Association, BBA. This was the authority which was involved basically in publishing this particular LIBOR rate. So, all of us are reporting this to this particular authority. Now, what if we misreport or we falsely report the rate of interest to this particular authority? Obviously, the LIBOR that is calculated will be a wrong LIBOR, and because this is used mainly as a benchmark, most of these particular transactions will also be affected because of this particular misstep. So, basic idea is the calculation of LIBOR was open to manipulation, and it was found out, and many of these particular banks which were involved in the manipulation of LIBOR were penalized. And after this, what happened was, rather than allowing BBA to calculate LIBOR, we basically shifted or set up a new authority, Intercontinental Exchange, ICE, in 2014, and this particular ICE has been made in charge of calculating and issuing LIBOR. These are certain important basic points. Let us go ahead. LIBOR is calculated for 5 currencies, remember this also, and is calculated for 7 tenures. I repeat, LIBOR is calculated for 5 currencies, US dollar, euro, the British pound, Swiss franc and Japanese yen. These are the 5 currencies for which LIBOR rate is calculated. In addition to this, there are 7 tenures for which LIBOR rate is also calculated. Overnight LIBOR rate is there, 1 week, 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 6 month and 12 month. So these are the 7 tenures as well as the 5 currencies. So based on this calculation, you can have a look at this. There are 5 currencies and there are 7 tenures. So totally 35 LIBOR rates are published every day. I will repeat it. There are 5 currencies and LIBOR is calculated for all the 5 currencies, and there are 7 tenures for which LIBOR rate is provided. So 5 into 7, 35 LIBOR rates are calculated and published every day. Now what has happened is, post 2021, many of these particular central banks have stated that because LIBOR is open to manipulation like this, we do not want to use LIBOR, we want to discontinue LIBOR, and instead of LIBOR we want to introduce some other parameter as a benchmark. And in this particular regard, the 2 important benchmarks which are being discussed very recently, which have become very famous apart from LIBOR, are, one is SOFR, secured overnight financing rate, and the second one is SONIA, that is sterling overnight interbank average rate. Although these two are becoming very famous, and in case of India, banks such as SBI, ICICI have already utilized SOFR for many of their financial transactions like this. Many of the experts are basically saying these two are no way popular or not as much as popular as the LIBOR is. So in this particular article, basically what RBI is telling, many of these particular banks are still using LIBOR for many of these particular financial transactions. So RBI is saying, please do not use any of these particular, or do not process any of these particular transaction where LIBOR is actually involved, because post 2021 we want to discontinue the usage of LIBOR. So please do not entertain any of these particular contracts, any of these particular agreements which are referencing a LIBOR. For example, there is one rate which is mentioned here, MIFOR, MIFOR, which basically stands for Mumbai Interbank Forward Outright Rate, and this particular MIFOR basically calculates or considers LIBOR as one of the parameters before deciding what is a MIFOR. So RBI is telling the banks, post this particular time period, end of this particular year, whatever transactions are there, allow it, but post that please use some other mechanism, use any alternative reference rate. They are using a short form here, ARR. Use any alternative reference rate. Please do not process the transactions which are referencing LIBOR as one of their benchmarks. That is in gist provided in this particular article. Now going beyond this, many of the experts have already stated that even though we want to discontinue LIBOR, there is a lot of difficulty with respect to this. What are the difficulties? LIBOR came into prominence post 1985, and in the last 3.5 decades, LIBOR has become very famous and has been used worldwide in many of these particular transactions. So on this particular scale, which is acceptable globally, there is no other alternative benchmark which is available right now. Although I have mentioned one SOFR as well as a SONIA or SONIA, please understand this, the amount of transactions or the volume of transactions which are done involving both of them are very less. So that becomes very difficult with respect to utilizing these as benchmarks. So these are some of the very important points related to RBI asking banks to basically phase out utilizing LIBOR. Now based on this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements. 1. LIBOR is published by US Federal Reserve. Statement is wrong. LIBOR is published by ICE, Intercontinental Exchange. Second, 35 LIBOR rates are calculated every day. Statement is correct. 5 currencies, 7 tenures. So obviously for each of the currency there are 7 tenures. Totally 35 LIBOR rates are published on day-to-day basis. Second statement is correct. So right option will be option B, only 2. Let's go to the next article. Executive order issued by President of USA. Now some of you might be thinking, why I am discussing what is happening in USA. There is a linkage that will establish once we discuss what is given in the article. Now very recently there has been a lot of talk with respect to multinational corporations such as e-commerce entities, internet giants, Google, right, so on and so forth. And very recently, to promote competition within the domestic market, the President of USA has issued an executive order. And this executive order is solely focused on promoting the competition within the domestic market, and this particular executive order has 72 points. And there are certain indicators which have been issued for various financial regulators, etc. Now, what are the main points within this particular executive order? It has raised concerns with respect to few of these particular internet companies collecting lot of data of customers. That is the first very important point, and you can basically take this particular point, connect it with India also, because there is a privacy or data privacy issue which is being discussed even in India. So, first point that is mentioned, a point of concern within this particular executive order is very few of these particular internet giants are collecting lot of data of these particular customers. And why this particular data is very important? Please remember this. The data of the customers is the new currency in the global market. For a simple reason, these particular companies will collect the data of customers or the expenditure pattern or behavioral pattern of these particular customers, and they will basically sell it to other organizations. And this has become the latest currency and the most important currency as of now. And who owns this particular data? Whether it is the government or it is the private entities, or is it the customer? That is the debate which is actually happening. So, first point of concern, very few companies collecting lot of data. Privacy. Second, there are very few companies which are basically acquiring the competitors in the market. Now, some of you will be thinking, sir, why is that a problem? That is a problem for a simple reason. If there is only one company which acquires many of these particular companies, the competition in the market will come down. The customers, if there are multiple competitors in the market, can choose to get either the product or a service from any of the competitor. And not to acquire this particular customer, these particular competitors will have to be on their A game, or will have to be very competitive in the market. Ultimately, the whole system benefits, the customer benefits. So, that is the basic idea. But what is happening? Few of these particular companies which are very big are basically acquiring their competitors, reducing the competition in the field. That is the point of the, that is the second point of concern raised in this particular executive order. Third, these particular bigger companies have certain issues or are using certain tools which are basically leading to antitrust behavior in the market. And if you have been reading the newspaper, the same kind of a discussion is happening with respect to CCI investigating companies such as Google, companies such as Amazon, so on and so forth. So, these are the 3 points of concerns which have been raised in this particular executive order. Now, what is the solution then? The order also mentions what shall be done in this particular regard. For example, it simply says the federal agencies now will be issuing new orders with respect to the data collection done by these particular entities. Second one, if there is an antitrust behavior of these particular companies or anti-competitive behavior done by these particular companies in the market, there will be a close scrutiny by these particular agencies as such. And the third one, if there is the acquisition of these particular competitors done continuously like this, then even these particular acquisitions and mergers, there will be a close scrutiny done by the federal agencies. So, these are certain points that you must be interested, or that you must focus with respect to UPSC exam. Now, in connection to this, right, what is the impact on India? Most of these particular points that we have discussed are the same points which are being discussed even in case of India, be it privacy of the customer, data privacy of the customers, anti-competitive behavior, so on and so forth. In addition to this, please understand this, because of this particular executive order, it is stated that the information technology industry in case of India is going to experience an upward boom in the next 5 years. Now, what is the connection here? The connection is very simple. If there is a very high competition within these particular companies in the US market, generally these particular US companies outsource the human resources to rest of the world. And one such example is they hire a lot of these experts, or they seek the experts' knowledge from India or the IT professionals from India. So, because of this particular order, the expectation is the competition between these particular private sector entities in USA will increase, and these particular companies will start outsourcing these kinds of jobs to Indian IT professional services. And because of this, in the next 5 years, we are expecting the IT industry in case of India to boom. So that is the discussion with respect to this particular article. Now based on this, I have given one question here. This was a statement given by the President of USA, Joe Biden. He basically stated that capitalism without competition is not capitalism, it's exploitation. You will have to elaborate this particular statement, and these kinds of statements, believe me, usually are asked in the UPSC exam. Now this is one descriptive question, you will have to answer it within 250 words. Next article is with respect to wage rate index. Now before I discuss what is given in this particular article, what is the basic idea for wage rate? Let us understand the basics first, then we will connect it to current affairs. Wage rate essentially means here is an employee, he has hired or he has been hired by an employer, is it okay? So here is a owner or a company which has hired a particular employee, and when he is hired, he is obviously expected to perform certain activity. He is expected to perform certain activity either in terms of number of hours or in terms of output. It can be either ways. So what is the payment that is done by the employer, right? What is the payment or what is the money that should be paid by the employer to the employee whenever this particular employee performs a certain activity either based on the output or based on the number of hours, is it okay? So basically the output or the productivity, how much energy is spent by the employee with respect to this, the money that is paid by the employer is called as a wage rate. Remember this. And wage rate calculation, please understand this, whenever wage rate calculation is involved, whenever the salary is provided, there are multiple components in the salary. Are all the components of the salary calculated as a part of the wage rate? No, please remember this. For example, when I say salary, certain person will earn, let us assume XYZ rupees. Out of this particular XYZ rupees, there is a basic wage, a basic minimum wage which is provided. In addition to this, there will be allowances, there will be house rent allowance, there will be the allowances for medical expenses, there will be allowances for relocation, bonus is provided, gratuity is provided. So all of it is a part of the salary, but please understand this, whenever you talk about the wage rate, you generally consider the basic the wages or basic salary that is provided. In addition to this, if there is any other allowance related to basic wages, only those are calculated. Other allowances such as house rent allowance, the transportation allowance, medical allowance, the bonus, gratuity, social welfare benefits, all of these are not part of the wage rate. Now why this is important? In case of India, please understand, recently there has been a lot of discussion with respect to national floor level minimum wages, and Government of India says we will revive this particular concept of a wage rate index, which basically considers the dearness allowance as well as the basic salary of the employee, and will adjust that with inflation rate over a period of time. And this wage rate index will be used to calculate national floor level minimum wages. And once that is decided, please understand this, that will be taken as a part of the labor codes imposed across all the states. That is important for a simple reason. Right now, central government has a directive with respect to minimum wages, but that is not binding on the states. But once the labor codes are implemented and government will decide national floor level minimum wages, then all the states must provide the wages which are at least this particular minimum wage as decided by the central government. Now beyond this, what are the interesting points with respect to this particular wage rate index? As of now, please understand this, there are many industries which are considered to calculate a wage rate index, and that is calculated by Labor Bureau. Remember this also. It is calculated by Labor Bureau, but important point that you need to note here is the base year as of now for the calculation of this particular index is 1963 to 65, and Government of India wants to revise this particular base rate from 65 to 2019. So these are certain very important points with respect to this particular wage rate index. Now based on this, I have given a question here, which of the following are included in calculation of wage rate? Basic wages, yes, it is part of it. DNS allowance, yes, it is part of it. House rent allowance, wrong. Medical allowance, no. Bonus, no. And again, just diverting or taking a deviation here, very recently there has been a discussion with respect to dearness allowance or dearness relief. Both are different, please be very careful. In the earlier videos we have covered both of it. Please update your information related to that. So 1 and 2 are the right points here. So right option is option B, only 1 and 2. Next article, PLI evaluation. Now I will not be discussing the concept of a PLI, we have already covered it in the earlier videos. What is the evaluation? Because if at all a question is asked, which is very likely in the UPSC means, you are supposed to write certain points beyond the introduction to PLI. Now what is the evaluation of this particular production linked incentive scheme so far? Now please understand this, as of end of May there are 13 sectors which are covered under production linked incentive. But there are certain sectors wherein there has been a lot of investment that has been promised or that has been allocated by the private sector entities, and there are certain sectors which have failed in attracting the private sector investment. This article discusses both the sides of the coin here. Now what are the sectors where the investment is very high? For example, mobile manufacturing, huge amount of investment is actually flowing into this particular sector. Or hardware manufacturing, IT hardware manufacturing, telecommunications, etc. These are some of the sectors where the amount of investment that is actually flowing is very high. On the other hand, there are also other sectors such as medical equipments, automobiles, etc., which have not been very successful in attracting investments or the interest of the private sectors within the PLI. Now what are the reasons? What are the issues here? The issues are these. Have a look at these particular issues. First one, within the medical equipments itself, yes, Government of India wants to promote domestic production within this particular segment. But as of now, there are two issues related to medical equipments. One, we are allowing imports of these particular medical equipments, and the rate of the GST or the tax rate on these particular imports very recently has been reduced. Now the argument is very simple. If you reduce the import duty or the tax rate on these particular medical equipments and you import them into India, compare that with the goods or the medical equipments which you are producing in the domestic market. If you reduce the tax, the imports are expected to become much more competitive or much more cheaper compared to the same equipment which is manufactured in India. So argument here is, why will a private sector company invest under PLI, produce a good and will end up selling it at a higher cost or higher price within the domestic market, for which the demand will be very less. So that is one reason. Second reason is, very recently there were 28 slots or 28 positions within PLI for which the tender was called by Government of India, and there were 28 bids which were given to government. Out of this, it was found that 15 of the bids or 15 of the companies which had basically proposed the bid, given a bid to government, these were not eligible at all. So there is also a concern with respect to eligibility conditions within this particular PLI scheme. So first one is what? Imports are becoming cheaper. Second one is, many of these companies are not able to meet eligibility regulations or eligibility conditions. Third one, please understand this, there are certain sectors, right, which the investors are willing to invest, but they are basically saying the time period of 5 years, because this particular scheme, under this the incentives are going to be provided for a period of 5 years. The time period is 5 years. These particular investors, such as the sector of steel or steel industry participants, are saying the time period of 5 years is very short. We are not happy with this particular 5 years. Why? Government says either you invest, set up a new steel manufacturing plant, or you can expand the existing steel manufacturing plant itself, and we are going to provide incentives if you meet certain conditions. But these investors or the companies are saying the 5-year time period is very short. Generally what happens is, in case of infrastructure projects, please remember one particular term that will be thrown around related to infrastructure projects is gestation period is very high. What is the meaning of gestation period? Generally the time taken for completion of infrastructure is very lengthy. So when the steel industry participants, they want to invest in this particular scheme or they want to be part of this particular scheme, they are basically saying 5-year time period is not sufficient for us. Maybe if the time period for us is extended from 5 years to 10 years, maybe then we will be able to manage the gestation period then invest and also make certain returns. This is the third issue. Fourth issue, many of these particular participants in other sectors or other industries, they are simply not willing to invest under PLI scheme for a simple reason. They are simply saying that the amount of returns which are guaranteed, the returns are generally guaranteed or incentives are guaranteed in the range of 4 to 6%. The amount of returns which are guaranteed are not sufficient for us to make an investment in the Indian market. So maybe if you can increase this particular incentive, maybe then we will try to invest or we will look at investing in these particular sectors. So these are the four issues which is basically holding back the success of production linked incentive scheme in other sectors. As of now, again I have told you 13 sectors the PLI is announced. Some sectors very successful, right? In some other sectors not very successful. These are the reasons. So this is a discussion related to evaluation of production linked incentive scheme. Let's go to the next article, very important from the UPSC exam, both prelims as well as mains. Very recently government, just make a correction here, RBI has stated that it is going to allow the retail investors, that is the household investors, to participate in the auctioning process of government securities and also purchase these particular government securities. Now this is not a very new announcement. The guidelines have been issued very recently. In the earlier videos we have already covered what is the proposal, what is the importance of that. But in this particular video, let's try and understand the critical evaluation of this particular proposal of RBI, because there is a lot of discussion which is going to happen in the coming days related to this only. The scheme or the program is basically called as RBI Retail Direct. Remember the name, Retail Direct program or Retail Direct scheme. In addition to this, understand they will use one more term here, Retail Direct Gilt, RDG, Retail Direct Gilt, and gilt basically refers to the government securities here. Now earlier what was the process? Were the retail investors, that is the household investors, were they allowed to purchase G securities? Yes. Follow the statements very carefully. This is how UPSC will play with you. Were the retail investors allowed to purchase G securities? Yes. Were they allowed to directly participate in the auction? Wrong. Remember this. Earlier there was a basic concept called as aggregate model. What is this aggregate model? Retail investors were allowed to purchase G securities but not directly. Directly basically through auction process. RBI auctions these particular G securities, be it either dated securities or treasury bills, the state development loans, and now gold bonds as such. Basically the sovereign gold bonds, that is what I am referring to. So RBI will basically auction them and purchase the or sell them and take the money and transfer it to government. So understand this, earlier what used to happen is, if you are a private investor or retail investor like this, you are basically allowed to bid for these particular bonds but without quoting any price or without quoting any yield. It is called as a non-competitive bidding process. Is it okay? I will repeat it, non-competitive bidding process. So under the aggregate model, the retail investor would basically log on to the websites or portals of either NSE or BSE and propose the bid. Alright, basically submit how much they want to purchase without quoting the price as well as the yield. Now have a look at this. Now this particular NSE or BSE would aggregate all of these particular demands which has been put forward by retail investors and give it to RBI. RBI would allocate the bonds or the government securities to these particular retail investors. So retail investors did not directly participate in the auction, they basically went through this particular aggregate model or aggregator model. That was the process. Now what is RBI saying? We will basically cut this particular process of NSE as well as BSE acting as intermediary, and will allow these particular retail investors to directly participate in the auction process and purchase the G securities. For that, now RBI says, one, you will have to have a bank account. Remember this. You will have to have a bank account. Second, you will have to have certain identification documents issued by Government of India, such as Aadhaar, driving license, PAN card, etc. Whatever, right, whatever bid for the government securities you want to propose, you will have to propose it through this particular RDG account that you are supposed to open with RBI. So have a bank account, SB account, have documents, open a retail direct gilt account with RBI, then start bidding for these particular G securities as such. Are the non-resident investors allowed to follow this particular process? Yes, even they are allowed to follow the process. Now, what is the basic idea here? RBI says we want to increase the number of participants in the market, which will basically provide more number of buyers in the market, or it will increase the number of buyers in the market. That will cool down the yield rates in the market. And Government of India wants to borrow heavily in the current financial year. It will also provide certain relief to Government of India when the number of buyers in the market are very, very large. This is on one side, but let's speak from the perspective of the customers here or the investors here. Whenever any investor wants to invest, especially the retail investors, they are concerned about certain parameters or they are focused on certain features. What are the features? One, they are worried about safety of their investment. Second, they are worried about returns on their investment. Third, they are worried about taxation. And fourth one, they are worried about liquidity. That is, how liquid is my investment. So, based on these particular four parameters, let's evaluate this particular proposal given by RBI to allow the retail investors to participate in the auction. First one, safety. There is no doubt related to the safety. Why? Government securities, or for that matter state development loans, where even these particular retail investors are allowed to auction now. Understand this, there is no problem with the safety, because if it is STL, these are issued by the state government, guarantees by the state government. If these are treasury bills, or for that matter dated securities, again these are issued by the Government of India. There is a sovereign guarantee or sovereign assurance that is provided by the government. So, there is no problem with respect to safety, right? One parameter addressed. Second parameter, returns. Now, the problems will start creeping up. Have a look at this. Whenever a retail investor will make an investment, obviously he is worried about his returns. Now, understand this, in case of a government securities, right now the yield rate is not very, very high. For example, the 10-year G security yield rate is around 6.1% and 5-year G security 5.7%. Right, 3-year G security 5.1%. So, the yield rates are very, very low compared to what? Compared to other forms of investment that this retail investor can do. For example, there is a National Savings Certificate NSC, there is a Kisan Vikas Patra which is a part of small savings schemes, both of them are part of small savings schemes. So, have a look at this. If you invest either in Kisan Vikas Patra or a National Savings Certificate, you will earn somewhere in the range of 6.8% to 6.9%. So, when you can earn 6.8 to 6.9% by investing in these, why should you invest in the government securities and earn lesser amount of money? That is one concern. So, in terms of returns, this particular scheme of Government of India will not be very, very successful, right? Again, assuming the investors are very, very rational here. Third one, taxation. Now, there is another issue with respect to taxation here. What is the issue? The returns that you earn on government securities, there is no tax incentive that is provided on it. Whereas, imagine if you make an investment in a mutual fund, right, and this particular mutual fund takes the money from you, collects the investment, invest in the bonds or the government securities in the market. Whatever yield rate that you are going to earn on this investment, on that immediately there is no taxation by the government, for a simple reason. You are simply holding the mutual fund, you have not yet submitted the mutual fund, you have not yet collected the money from the mutual fund company. The yield will be added to net asset value of the mutual fund, again reinvested in the market. Your returns are continuously increasing like this without being imposed with taxation. Whereas, in case of government securities, if you are a retail investor, invest directly, earn certain returns on that in the form of a yield rate. And please understand this, government will simply say, as per your slab rate, I will impose the tax rate on these particular returns. That is, it will be part of your income, and whatever income tax you are supposed to pay based on the slab, right, even this particular income will be imposed with that particular tax rate. That is another concern. Fourth concern, liquidity. A fourth parameter, liquidity. Please understand this, if you are a retail investor, imagine you have kept money in the fixed deposit. And after 6 months, initially you wanted to invest or keep it for, let's say, 1 year, you had entered into a contract with the bank, you basically said 1 year, that is the time period for which I am going to keep the money in the bank. On the other hand, understand this, you invest in a government security, let's assume a 10-year government security, obviously you are going to earn the yield rate semi-annually like this, but the principal you will return, or you will be given the principal after the maturity period itself. But what is the concern here? Concern is, imagine in case of FD, right, initial agreement was for 1 year, but if you break the FD midway, let us say 6 months, after 6 months, the bank will impose certain penalty on the interest and give back the principal with lower interest to the investor. Whereas in case of government securities, there is a problem with respect to liquidity for a simple reason. These government securities, the market value is dependent on the trading of these particular securities. That is, there is a risk involved by investing in these particular government securities with respect to how much you are going to earn, because in the market prices of these G securities could be higher, could be lower, so on and so forth. So investor or retail investors will be more exposed in case of direct investment in government securities compared to any other type of an investment. So on these particular 4 parameters, various experts have stated that there is a need for both Government of India as well as RBI to do more if they want to attract a lot of these particular retail investments into these particular RDG accounts, and if they want to increase the participation of the retail investors within this particular process. So this is the detailed discussion with respect to RBI allowing the retail investors to directly participate and purchase these particular government bonds. Next, another scheme, Kusum Scheme, right, very famous. Very recently this has been there in the newspaper. Understand this, first and foremost, this was announced in the budget for financial year 2018 and 2019 by the then Finance Minister Mr. Arun Jaitley. The long form of Kusum has been provided here. Have a look at it. Pradhan Mantri Kisan Urja Suraksha Evam Utthan Mahabhiyan. Now understand this, under this particular scheme, what is the objective? That is more important here. What is the objective? Government of India basically stated that there are lot of these particular pump sets in India. Out of these particular pump sets, understand this, most of them, around 70% of them are working on electricity, and around 30%, I am just rounding off the numbers here, around 30% of them are using diesel. So obviously these were the objectives with which this particular scheme was introduced by Government of India. One, we want to reduce the dependency of diesel consumption in the agriculture sector for irrigation purposes. And second, electricity, there is an issue related to agriculture sector. What is the issue? One, the AT&C losses of DISCOMs is very high. What is AT&C? Aggregate technical and commercial losses of the DISCOMs is very high. Second, in majority of or in many of these particular states, electricity for agriculture purpose is provided at a subsidized prices, which will basically lead to certain revenue implications for the DISCOMs. So Government of India stated, one, I want to reduce the consumption of a diesel. Second, I want to reduce the amount of a subsidy that is provided for electricity in the agriculture sector. And third one, I also want to work on the AT&C losses that is incurred by the DISCOMs at the state level. For all of this, the basic package that was announced, or the basic scheme that was announced by the government, was a Kusum scheme. Under this, basically they stated, we want to use solar pumps, that is basically utilization of solar panels to pump or generate electricity and to pump the water. So 28 gigawatt of electricity or the solar pumps was the target under this particular Kusum scheme. In addition to this, government also stated that we want to provide a source of revenue for the farmers. Through what? Imagine here is a farmer who has basically installed this particular solar fitting as such or solar equipment, and the generation of electricity that has been done is higher than what he actually requires to irrigate. At this particular point of time, government mandated the DISCOMs to purchase electricity from this particular farmer. Is it okay? The DISCOM was mandated to purchase electricity from the farmer and pay him money. So farmers' income would also be increased. So these were some of the objectives with which the Kusum scheme was implemented by the government. Although the announcement was done in the budget for 18 and 19, please understand, cabinet approval was given in February 2019. And those who know how the budgeting works, right, you will realize announcement was done for 18 and 19 and the cabinet approval was provided in February 2019, almost 1 year. Again, I am using the term almost here. So almost 1 year after the announcement, the cabinet approval has been provided. even after the approval, has the process been or has the scheme been implemented successfully, there are a lot of issues with respect to implementation. The issues is related to the formation of the policy. The whole evolution of the policy has been provided here. You do not have to mug up the evolution here. What they are basically saying is, first point, MNRE, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, was made the nodal ministry here, and over a period of time it has tried to bring in lot of these particular agencies to raise money for the implementation of this particular scheme. Now I am saying lot of agencies were involved to raise money for a simple reason. The total amount of the allocation that was done, or basically announcement for this particular scheme, was 1.4 trillion rupees. Is it okay? 1.4 trillion rupees or 1.4 lakh crore rupees. Out of this, Government of India basically said, I will give from my box or from my pocket, I will only provide 48,000 crore rupees. Rest of it has to be raised from some other source. And for raising this particular money, MNRE earlier basically used IREDA, right? That is basically Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency, tried to hook it up and basically help in raising the funds. This has not been very successful. Over a period of time, there have been issues with respect to funding of this particular scheme. And not just this, in the budget for 20, again this particular scheme was revamped. And very recently this particular scheme has basically been subsumed under the latest package which has been announced by power sector scheme or DISCOM's scheme by the Government of India. Now in addition to this, understand this, in addition to this, another one point that you need to understand is, it's not just that the central government has announced such a kind of a scheme. Even before central government, there were many states which had basically announced the same type of a scheme, where they were installing these kinds of solar equipment which could be used for irrigation purposes. So when central government also announced a scheme, these states, it is said that, were not willing to integrate their scheme or merge their scheme with the central government scheme. That also has been one of the other issue with respect to implementation of the Kusum scheme as such. So these are some of the important points related to this particular scheme. If at all a question is asked on evaluation, please be very careful with respect to these kinds of points. The next article, central takes total control of district mineral funds from the states. Let's try and understand the basics first here. Government of India amended Minerals, Mines and Minerals Development and Regulation Act of 1957 in the year 2015. Is it okay? MMDR, Amendment Act of 2015. Under this particular MMDR Amendment Act of 2015, central government basically introduced the concept of a DEM of funds, that is a District Mineral Foundation Fund. Is it okay? District Mineral Foundation Fund. This particular DMF fund was supposed to be set up at the state level. That is, the state government shall set up this particular fund, shall basically allocate how it is supposed to be functioning, so on and so forth. Provided within the same Amendment Act, it also stated that the central government agrees with this kind of a function which has been allocated by the state government related to fund. That is, if the state government sets up this particular DMF fund, state government is entitled as to how to utilize the funds, for which purpose they are supposed to utilize the funds, they are entitled. But more importantly, understand this, the concept of a DMF was set up in order to ensure that the interest of the population which is affected by the mining will be protected. Is it okay? The interest of the population which is affected by the mining. Within these particular districts, obviously there is a mining activity, and because of the mining activity, the population is affected. So to protect the interest of this particular population, the DMF fund was set up. So going back to the original point here, state government could basically decide the function of the DMF fund, could allocate the funds for various projects, provided central government also approves this. If the central government doesn't feel like allowing the state government, they could simply take away the power from the state government. That is exactly what has been done by the central government here. Now what has been the issue here? Why central government has taken this particular decision? Very recently the central government stated that many of these particular funds which is lying within this particular DMF, the state governments are basically transferring that within their consolidated fund. Some of the states are transferring that within their consolidated fund. Some of the states are basically taking out of this and they are transferring that to Chief Minister's Relief Fund, etc. So central government says this is not the objective of setting up a DMF fund. Is it okay? What is the objective? To protect the interest of the people within these particular districts who are affected by this particular mining activity. Now, how it is going to be done? Have a look at this. 60% of these particular funds, that is out of this particular DMF fund, 60% of that will be taken and that will be used for high priority projects. What do you mean by high priority projects? If there is a project which is being implemented for providing safe drinking water to this particular population, if there is a project which is being implemented to promote education amongst this particular population, these are called as a high priority projects. And remaining 40% of the DMF funds will be used for low priority projects or below the high priority projects. That is basically the infrastructure projects, power projects, so on and so forth. Now, apart from this, from where the money will come or from where the funds will be coming from the DMF fund, this could be again the potential question in the UPSC prelims. Central government out of its pocket is not going to provide any money to the DMF fund. Remember this, I will repeat it. Central government out of the consolidated fund of India will not transfer anything to this particular DMF fund. Then from where the money will come? It is contributed by these particular licensees. That is those particular companies which have been given the license to mine within these particular districts, they will have to provide or they will have to pay certain money to the government in the form of royalty. And as a percentage of royalty, remember this, royalties has to be paid anyways. As a percentage of royalty, these particular mining companies will also have to contribute to the District Mineral Foundation Fund, right? Before 2015, if at all the license has been issued, the percentage was 30%, and after that if the license has been issued, they will have to contribute 10% of the royalty to this particular DMF fund. So, these are certain very important points. Central government says the state governments are misusing these particular funds. They are not using the funds for the objective with which the DMF fund has been set up. So, what I will do? I will simply take away the control of the state governments. Central government says the state government will not be authorized to withdraw any of the funds within the DMF fund for any of the projects. Now, that will be done by the central government. And this was very much evident last year itself when the central government asked the states to use this particular DMF fund for development of healthcare infrastructure during the COVID impact as such, or during the fight against the COVID. One of the stimulus packages under that, central government basically said state governments can use the funds which are there within the DMF funds to develop healthcare infrastructure. So, these are some of the very important points with respect to DMF. Please be very careful with respect to this article. Next article, based on one of the RBI articles, RBI article has basically mentioned that external benchmarking system has improved monetary transmission. What are the important points here? RBI post October 1st, 2019 mandated to these particular banks that the loans that they are going to give under the SMEs, small and medium enterprises category, as well as those particular floating rate personal loans that are given by them, they will have to basically provide the rate of interest or impose a rate of interest on this based on the concept called as external benchmarking. RBI, rather than allowing the banks to decide their own lending rate or based on certain the parameters which were earlier used such as MCLR or base rate regime, RBI simply shifted the pricing of these particular loans to a concept called as external benchmarking. And this article mentions that the number of loans as a percentage, the number of loans which are coming under the external benchmarking over a period of time has increased. For example, have a look at this. Before the introduction of external benchmarking, only 2.4% of the outstanding loans were basically under the concept of external benchmarking, and within 2 years, that is by March 2021, this has actually increased to 28.9%. or 28.5%, just make a correction here. So, the number of loans which are kept under external benchmarking has increased. Some of you will be thinking, sir, what is the impact? Why this becomes important? It becomes important for a simple reason. For a bank, they will always have to protect their interest margins. Now, what is this interest margins? Have a look at this. Banks will borrow and banks will lend. Is it okay? This is a bank. Bank is borrowing, bank is lending, and when they borrow, they will have to pay a certain rate of interest here, and when they lend, they will charge a certain rate of interest. The difference between both of them is called as interest rate margin. Is it okay? And that forms one of the most important earnings for a bank. And in recent times, these particular lending rates have become very volatile for a simple reason. RBI has been fluctuating, or the rate of interest or the policy rate, repo rate, there has been volatility because RBI has been changing this. As a result of this, the banks have also changed the interest rates that they are going to pay on these particular kind of deposits, which is nothing but a part of borrowings. So in essence, there has been a better monetary policy transmission because of external benchmarking that has been introduced by RBI. So this is in just related to what RBI article speaks about the external benchmarking. Next article, Madhyam Portal. Again, just a tidbit here. Madhyam Portal has been set up or will be set up by Government of India or rolled out throughout India. As of now, it is a pilot project as such. Under this, the concept is very simple. Government of India is promoting the concept of ease of doing business. It is promoting concept of ease of doing business through what? If you want to set up, let's assume, if you want to set up a unit within the SEZ, if you want to open up a retail fuel outlet, if you want to get a license for exporting, you will have to go through a particular regulatory process like this. What Government of India says, we will make it much more easier for you to get these kinds of regulatory approvals. As of now, please understand this, the article simply says the Government of India in the next month is going to launch this particular portal, Madhyam Portal, and anybody who wants, let's say, the regulatory approvals in areas such as opening up a unit within the SEZ, opening up a retail fuel outlet, getting a permanent approval or permanent license for exporting, etc. These kinds of approvals, be it at the central level or at the state level, these kinds of approvals can be sought very easy through this particular portal as such. And the article simply says around 560 such approvals, be it at the central government level, different ministry level, department level, or even at around 28 the central level as well as the state government level, these kinds of approvals can be easily sought by the investors now. And this is expected to promote the concept of a ease of doing business. Not only this, this particular portal has been integrated with the portal for the same concept introduced by many of the state governments. So there is an integration at the central as well as at the state level. In addition to this, the portal will also provide information related to what kind of regulatory approvals one will require to start a particular business. In simple terms, the education will be provided, information will be provided to these investors as to what kind of approvals they actually require. So based on that, they can apply for these particular approvals through the portal. Next point, the portal also provides the real-time monitoring of their applications. That is, if I am one of the investors, I have applied through this particular portal, what has happened, which ministry has given the approval, which ministry is withholding the approval, which department has given the approval. In real time, I can monitor my application. So all of these are some of the very important points with respect to the Madhyam portal, which is being proposed by Government of India to be implemented from the next month. So this is in just related to this particular article. Next article, the last for today, as well as the most important or one of the very important articles, is with respect to RBI barring Mastercard from issuing new cards from July 22nd, that is couple of days from now. Now please understand, this is not the first time that RBI has actually barred one of these particular companies from acquiring customers or issuing cards to new customers. That is very, very important. Please understand this, RBI has not told them to withdraw all the cards. RBI is simply saying you cannot acquire new customers from July 22. Earlier, Diners Club, right, has been imposed with the same restriction. American Express also has been imposed with the same restriction. Why RBI has done this, right? That will be much more important from the UPSC exams perspective. Please understand this, RBI under one of the acts, that is a PSS Act of 2007, Payment Settlement Systems Act of 2007, can allow any private entity to operate as a payment settlement gateway. And under this particular same act, RBI is given the power, RBI has been given the power to regulate, to set standards or basically all the powers related to this particular payment settlement systems has been given to RBI. Now have a look at this. Over a period of time, again and again I am going back to this particular concept of a data, that is a customer data. So have a look at this. Over a period of time, there were certain situations where the transactions have been conducted. The data related to transactions is not available for the investigating agencies for a simple reason. Whenever these transactions are done, for example using let's say Mastercard, they generally have a centralized processing, and this particular processing is done outside India. So for the investigating agencies within India, it is very difficult to get access to this particular transaction data. Now some of you will be confused as to what is the role of Mastercard in all of this. Imagine you have been issued with a debit card by a particular bank XYZ, and this particular card in the corner generally will have either Visa written or Mastercard written or the domestic payment gateway RuPay written. So either one of the three are have been issued to you. So generally what happens is, if you use this particular card, either credit card, a prepaid instrument or even a debit card, for conducting any kind of a transaction, the issuer of the card, that is the name of the company which is written here, Visa, Mastercard or RuPay, will act as a mediator between the shop where you are using the card or the place where you are using the card and a particular bank. That is called as a payment gateway. So you take RuPay, Visa or Mastercard, all of them are payment gateways itself. They will facilitate a transaction between the bank as well as the shop or the place where you are using the card as such. So understand this, under the PSS Act, RBI has allowed Visa company to operate in India. RuPay, again, although we are not going to directly use RuPay, we are going to use the institute or the authority which has designed RuPay, that is NPCI, National Payment Corporation of India. So RuPay has been allowed, that is NPCI, Visa has been allowed, Mastercard has been allowed. And very recently, that is in the year 2018, RBI basically stated that the data related to transaction, any kind of a transaction related to PPI, related to debit card or a credit card, the data related to that particular transaction has to be stored within India, or in simple terms, RBI came out with the data localization rules. Many of these particular entities oppose that, right? For example, Mastercard simply said, we are using a centralized processing like this. From multiple countries, these particular transactions are being processed in one area like this. So if you ask me to store within India, right, that becomes very difficult for me immediately. So what RBI basically said, okay, then I will give you 6 months time period, set up infrastructure so that you will store the data only within India. Then again they raised certain concerns. RBI said, okay, allowed, you are allowed to process the transaction outside India, but the information related to this particular transaction has to be stored within India. Is it okay? First point, the information related to this transaction has to be stored within India. And second, if you have processed this transaction outside India, then that information has to be deleted from your server within 24 hours. In essence, there shall be no copy of this transaction outside India. There shall be no mirror image of this particular transaction outside India. Everything has to be stored within India. So citing this particular guideline, American Express right, has been asked not to basically acquire new customers. Diners Club has been asked not to enroll any new customers. Now Mastercard has been asked not to enroll any new customers. Now what is the impact of this? Impact, let's try and understand that. Impact is very simple. One, number of companies which are acting as a payment gateway today in India are Mastercard, Visa as well as RuPay. Visa has the highest market share, around 1/3 of the market share is basically with Mastercard, and rest of them right, have the remaining market share. Now if you basically take out Mastercard out of the market, the banks which were about to issue Mastercard, right, or basically the debit card, credit card or PPI where Mastercard is a payment gateway, the banks are disincentivized now. Many of these particular banks have already have 100% of their cards being issued by only Mastercard. Best example for that is Yes Bank. 100% of their cards are basically Mastercards only. So these particular banks will be disincentivized, right? Another bank such as HDFC, 60% of their cards are basically Mastercard, Diners Club as well as American Express. The customers will be disincentivized, or the bank will be suffering now, right? ICICI Bank, 36% of their debit cards or the overall cards are basically Mastercards. So banking sector, right, there will be concern in the banking sector, right, for a simple reason, their existing customers, now there will be a dilemma or a confusion in the market. And second, what if they had right, already entered into an agreement to issue Mastercards, now they will have to find a new, right, payment gateway such as Visa or Rupee. Next one, by forcing these kinds of guidelines on these kinds of entities, the foreign entities will be forced to make more investment to develop infrastructure in India. But much more concerning for these particular foreign entities is, what if India is just a starting point? What if other countries follow the same suit and simply say, right, they will have to store the data within, right, the respective boundaries only. That will create much more problems for these kinds of companies. Next, higher or much more concerning impact will be, I simply said that majority of the market is between Visa as well as a Mastercard, and both of them are not Indian entities. Now Mastercard, right, has been right, pushed out of the system, or for time being, until unless the ban is lifted, it cannot operate in the market. So who else is left out? Visa is left out, Rupee is left out. Now there are concerns saying that these particular governments across the globe can simply use these kinds of tools to promote domestic companies rather than providing the same level competition, or allowing the private sector entities to compete in the market. In simple terms, Rupee, right, is government owned or it is Indian owned, whereas Visa as well as Mastercard are foreign owned entities. So if you basically push out Mastercard, who else is left out in the market? Rupee is left out as well as Visa is left out. Now what is the guarantee that in the future same kind of restrictions are not imposed on Visa also? If the same restrictions are imposed on Visa, then who is left out? Only Rupee is left out. So the policy can be used as a discriminatory practice by the governments across the globe to push the domestic companies like this. So these are some of the concerns which have been raised with respect to this particular decision of RBI. So these are some of the articles as well as the questions related to articles for this particular time period. Now before I wind up the session, if you like our initiative, please hit the like button and provide your valuable inputs in the comment section. If you have not yet subscribed to our channel, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Have a good day.